Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I hope everybody is doing well wherever you are in these far-flung places that you are. I hope you are keeping well. We're in very challenging times, and so please do your best. So this is the next to last reading that we have tonight. Next week when we meet, we will be finishing the book. So we'll talk then next week about what we want to do, whether we want to take a couple of weeks break or whether we want to go on. The new book will not be ready until about mid-August. So, and that is the book that I would like to take up next. And that is going to be published around August 15th. And so tonight we, in The Essence of Zen by Sekkei Harada, we are reading from pages 143 to the bottom of 148. So, mind cannot be grasped. There are a number of koans about grasping things and reaching out, or the word grasped is used a great deal, like somebody reaches out and grasps another, or can the mind be grasped, or something. If you grasp this, I will whip you 100 times, something like that. So it's a common word in Zen. And so we come to the expression, the three worlds of mind cannot be grasped. Mind of the past, mind of the present, and the mind of the future. And then we have this fairly long story about two monks, Ryutan and Tokusan. And Ryutan is a scholar, and he is very interested he's a scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and he's very interested in challenging this other fellow, Tokusan, who is a teacher. And so he makes his way into the mountain wherever Tokusan is living. And along the way, he stops at a cafe, and he gets a bit hungry. And he encounters the woman in the cafe, the old woman, and she serves him some cakes, and he talks about Tokusan, and he's going to go and he's going to challenge him, and he's going to go do some Zen Dharma combat, Dharma struggles together, Dharma battle. And so then the old woman challenges him and says, you know, if mind cannot be grasped, what is the mind that is eating these cakes? With what mind do you eat these cakes? And so he is completely stunned. He can't answer. It's very interesting. There are many old women who appear in koans, and they are very rarely given a name. It's just an old woman comes, and she delivers some kind of great wisdom. And so these young monks are typically challenged by the wisdom that this old woman brings. But rarely have I, in any koans, are they given any kind of name, just an old woman. And there is some lore also about every temple has an old woman in the background. In the temple where I trained, there was an old woman who took care of the money of the temple. And that was her job. And she had a little cottage that was slightly off campus. And she was served 3 meals a day. And her job was to take care of the finances of the temple. And that was that. And so at the same time, she exerted great influence on the temple. I will say that. She was deeply respected in that you did not want to get in her way at all, because you just did not know what she would say or what she would do. So everybody had deep respect for her. So in this case, once again, this old woman says this to him, and he is rendered kind of dumb. And so it's most interesting because we've been reading this as a kind of a parable, a teaching story. This is very much in the way that Dogen Zenji gave koan stories, that he used them in a parable-like fashion. But the question that the woman asked is a deep koan style question. And so, to me, it's a very interesting combination of the way Harada Roshi presents it as a parable and a koan at the same time, once the woman asks the question. And then, of course, Ryutan finds the temple, and he goes in and he meets Tokusan, and they apparently have some kind of conversation. We're not privy to exactly all the exchange that they had, but we can imagine that they exchanged something. And then, and I'm sure that Ryutan had some change of thought or maybe let's say a deeper respect for Tokusan in whatever exchange that they had that we're not privy to. But then when he's getting ready to leave, Tokusan lights a lantern, and right at the moment that Ryutan is going to put on his sandals, then Tokusan, he blows out the candle, and at that moment, then Tokusan awakens. So we have some things to unpack in this, I think, and to try to understand what might be going on in that story, and what happens when the flame is blown out. And Tokusan is certainly presented in the beginning as haughty and arrogant and intellectual and knowing everything, and he's going to certainly show this Tokusan something. But he also exemplifies some extraordinary qualities that I think that would be well for us to consider, and what it is that brings him to this study, and his intention and his determination. And to me, he does exemplify these three aspects that are necessary for training. And that is great faith, great doubt, and great determination. There's three qualities that one needs in Zen practice. And it seems to me, in spite of the fact that he comes across as arrogant and all-knowing, at the same time, he has tremendous faith in his uncovering of his examination of the Diamond Sutra, and great doubt we don't see quite as much, but it must be there at the same time. And I think I want to talk about doubt also. And then his determination to see this through, to truly put across what he has learned. So anyway, so maybe you have some thoughts first about this, or some questions. Where is the mind?
Well, my reaction to it was that he was this pompous scholar type who, when confronted with the humility of the woman with the rice cakes, and when he was asked that question, the text here says he was dumbfounded, and I think he was confronted at that time with this moment of doubt of who he was, who he had built himself up to be. He was confronted with this totally different situation than what he thought he was going to experience. He was just going to get a snack and then move on and go into his Dharma combat. And now all of a sudden it was like the ground had just fallen out from under him and he didn't know who he was anymore. To me, the fact that he continued on to the temple to engage Ryotan with the Dharma combat, he had set himself a path and he was following it. And I guess for me too, this section opens up with this mention of Ryotan's teaching that the mind itself is Buddha and everyday mind is the way. And he was just given this beautiful opportunity. He thought he was going with one objective and in one way, and all of a sudden life gave him something totally different.
Yeah, very wonderful. Really, really wonderful story. Yeah.
He was Kokusan was reliant on all the energy he put into learning and studying the Diamond Sutra. And when he heard that someone else was doing something else relating to the mind itself, he thought it was outrageous. And it seemed to go in against everything that he had been studying, and he thought that his study was the study. And being humbled by the woman allowed him to see his error, I think, and because he was embarrassed. And sometimes it takes some catalyst or some action to bring us to a point where we're more open to other perspectives. And I think that was really an important part of the story, how that transformation from his strength behind the Diamond Sutra and all the effort he put into studying it to meeting a woman serving tea and cakes, being able to bring him to where he needed to go. But for a long time, I've been under the impression that there are the past, the present, and the future, and that the past and the future are illusionary or non-existent. Really, they're gone or they're not here, and that the present is the only state, is the only mind. But after reading this, I've had to think about that a little more deeply and try to figure out how that fits. So it was an interesting parable, interesting story, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and another word for us to take is how he was opened. Opening is another thing for us to examine in this, I think.
I'd just like to give a shout out to the unnamed old woman and all of the obviously decades of practice that she did within probably great constraints within the culture, the mores and strictures on how women could function, and yet this wisdom, that sort of comes through. Her name is Bodhisattva. I just, she's like almost hidden, and in fact she is hidden. She's just a prop to Tokusan until she pulls out the Dharma blade and sort of slices open his hubris. So let's hear it for the unnamed old woman, who's really like the star of the show as far as I'm concerned.
Very much so. Very much so. When old women appear in one of these stories, it's the turning moment. Something big happens. So, yeah. Anybody else want to say? Yeah.
I just find it was brought to my attention not that long ago around, on some Saturday around the table where we were talking about kind of how to study koans. I think maybe a qualifier would be from like a Soto perspective. And it's like that moment at which you identify with every character in the story. Which I think is fascinating, that like the story would be so incomplete with just the teacher and you know, the soon to be disciple, but it took that kind of that like wild unknown quality as well, which I think is what she represents, like sort of spontaneity itself. And I guess it's sort of what I imagine. It's like, I mean, it's just pure speculation, but I imagine the story would have gone very differently had his first engagement been with the teacher.
Yeah. And the woman also, I mean, it doesn't take place in the monastery either, which is also interesting. It's in the cafe, you know, where this wisdom is imparted, or he's opened not in the temple itself, but in the cafe, eating a cake and having a cup of tea. And so it represents the opportunity for us to be open to wherever we are. We don't have to be in the monastery for this to occur.
Actually, someone brought this idea. I think one idea, it's that I think sort of what lowers our defenses in general is kind of being off kilter. It's like when you're meeting what you expect, it's sort of like, I don't know if you really can drop your defenses. It sort of takes that unknown variable, I think, to really open.
Right. And
This seems. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, this seems to be. It kind of reverberates in the moment of the blown out lantern. You know, all the expected appearances of, you know, reaching down to take care of your sandals. Suddenly, that's gone, and that moment of disorientation and sort of blindness suddenly, ignites awakened consciousness.
So there's something interesting about that darkness. I mean, certainly in Zen practice, it's in darkness where we have the unity of all things, because we can't see anything in darkness. So there's no separation of things. There's no perception, as it were. When we can see everything, we enter perception, and we see the division in things. And in darkness, there is no division. So it's another symbolic moment, I think, in the use of darkness and light, dark and light. Very interesting also. But there was also the suddenness of that happening for him, I think. I mean, we can only imagine all that is going on within him at that moment. He's been with this teacher, and something is going on in him, and then suddenly there's this flash. The darkness happens, and he is stunned by it. And he also recognizes that Ryutan is the one who brought about that moment. And he becomes Ryutan's teacher. Student. No different, student teacher. So most interesting. But I think Harada Roshi also points out that at that moment that the woman says to him, what is the mind? What mind is eating the cakes? He takes that for himself, that he examines it for himself, which is an important point also. He doesn't shrug it off. He really takes it in. And that is one of those deep qualities that is necessary, that he stands, even though it shocks him and he's embarrassed, humiliated. At the same time, he has faced it. So there's several pivotal moments that occur then in this story that lead to this opening of sudden blackness, which is the big opening. So,
Edo-san?
yeah.
I think what kind of struck me about these dialogues is, I guess Toku-san comes from, I'm very scholarly, and as he says, he understood well the meaning of the words. And yet, in his meeting with the old woman, they're engaged in a very mundane activity. He orders a snack, she brings the snack and asks a question, and he's thrown off balance. And likewise, later that day, he's doing Dharma combat, and he's, I'm sure his intelligence and learning are on display and so on and so forth. And then he's simply putting on his shoes and the light goes out. And again, very mundane occurrence.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, the relevance of the mundane occurrences and the significance of those relative to his intellection and his vast learning of the Diamond Sutra.
Yeah.
And I can't help feeling that maybe that's what these people are pointing to. You're missing the point. You're lost in words. There it is, right in front of you. So,
No, good point, Bob. And, in the koans or in the awakening stories, it's never anything except something quite mundane that brings about the awakening. A flower petal falls on the floor, or a drip of water comes out of, the waterfall, or a dog barks, or a bird sings. These are always something very common and mundane is the occasion of someone's awakening. So, great to point that out in this story too, that it is not the big intellection, but the attention to the simplicity of life before us.
I guess it sort of presents the question of what is not mundane. I mean, I feel like you could almost frame delusion that way.
Yeah, I suppose.
yeah.
I mean, it's like you can imagine that there's something that is not mundane. And I think that's sort of what you're self-generating. Which is what's separating you from the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I took this was such a dramatic story to me. Here he is ready to do Dharma battle, and he's just about to enter the gate when something very mundane, this need for hunger, it's 12 noon, all these little symbols, and he enters and he is confronted by something that stopped him. So in a way, his battle started in the tea room with that lady. That woman was a wisdom figure that shattered all of his thinking before he entered the gate to the monastery. I found that to be very profound. I found that to be something to pause and think about there. How I was speaking with a medical specialist today, and he said to me, "Why do we eat? Do we need to eat?" And I thought about that because I read the story again after I met with the medical specialist, and I got to thinking, if this gentleman hadn't decided he needed a snack, he never would have had that encounter with wisdom. Remarkable to me. So I don't know more what to say about it, except I found it to be very dramatic in a way.
Mm. But it is the doubt that he brings with him as he enters the temple then, which is a very important aspect of Zen practice, which is not the kind of doubt that we have where we doubt things. It's a much more subtle kind of doubt that is not, that doesn't involve language exactly. It doesn't involve any kind of discourse. It's something very deep in us that we, and maybe it's a very, very deep identity issue also, that so many of the koans are related to identity. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I to do in life? So forth. These are all great koans, and they are identity related. And so he has this identity problem as he enters the temple. Not sure then for a moment whether his scholarship has served him well.
Oh boy, because we do so many things in our studies in life, and then you do hit sometimes someplace or someone who makes you question. That's what you're talking about then.
Yes. Yeah, it's a quiet curiosity, perhaps, a kind of doubt in its curiosity. And so, one keeps searching. And in there are certain practices where one never gets an answer. And the practice is to never have an answer. And that's very, very difficult kind of doubt practice. It's a Korean form, I think. But doubt is it's a necessary quality to Zen practice. A necessary dynamic, inner dynamic. So where he has great faith, he comes at this with great faith and great determination. And then the doubt comes in, and it's like the fulfillment of those three elements of practice that are necessary.
It's quite possible that I missed it, but with respect to not providing an answer, one of the attributes of Harada that I really enjoy is that he presents many parables, many stories, and often he doesn't present an answer. And coming back, perhaps I missed it, but she asked the question, where is the mind that can be gratified and that must be satisfied? In the next paragraph, where is the mind? In the next page, when the light goes out, he's enlightened, but I don't know that question was actually answered. Where is the mind? And so it leaves us open-ended to pursue that for ourselves.
Indeed, it's something that we must pursue. But in that paragraph, I found it a little bit curious in that he is, the mind of the future cannot be grasped. And this is Harada Roshi's, or maybe it's the translator's work here. Certainly, in order to satisfy the mind, to relieve my hunger, I've asked for a snack. But if the mind does not exist in any of the three worlds of time, then why do I want to satisfy it? So my great doubt had to do with the grasping versus existing, because that switched over in that paragraph. And I don't know if any of you caught that or thought that was a curious thing. Because I don't know that we can say that we don't exist, even though we cannot grasp a mind, because we exist, mind functions. So it's hard for me to say that mind does not exist. If the mind does not exist, if any of the three worlds of time, then why do I want to satisfy it? Where is the mind that can be gratified and that must be satisfied? So I don't know whether that's Harada Roshi talking there, or whether that's a continuation of Tokusan's mind or thoughts in that. I'm not sure, but I found that a little bit curious. But we don't have to dwell on it because it's just an aspect of scholarship. So we don't need to worry too much.
I think my sort of theory as to I think how Westerners should, as I understand it, it's that we exist because of mind. It's like you can flip them. Like, is there mind because we exist, or do we exist because there's mind? And my sense is that, like, Zen is what we would refer to in the West as phenomenological.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's predicated, in some sense, is summarized in that distinction that mind precedes existence. That existence is like a construct we make from mind.
I could agree with that, Will. I think that, when we say that we are Buddha mind, we don't worry about the question of existence, but we just are being. And so mind is something that we participate in wholly, but don't own. Like consciousness, we don't own consciousness. We share consciousness totally, and we share mind totally.
Which I think, in philosophical speak, which is somewhat ironic given our topic, there's that notion of like the metaphysical substrate. It's like at some point there's something that is not reducible. And I think like that's why this is important, because there's multiple frameworks that you could have. You could posit materiality as that substrate. But I think the whole phenomenological sort of mission is sort of in that reversal. It's that materiality isn't the substrate. It's just existences.
Right.
Which I think.
Right. And material, we are not substantial. So material is actually not substantial.
I mean, it, in some sense, circumvents that, because you're not framing existence from materialism.
No, I'm not.
Well, I think that's sort of what phenomenological traditions have in common.
Mm-hmm.
It's that it in essence throws out like materialism. I mean, to just put it simply.
It does, yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's a difficult that's a difficult experience to encounter, that we are not that we are insubstantial. But it is one of the great teachings. I mean, it is a great teaching in Buddhism, and Dogen Zenji takes it up fairly often, in the insubstantiality of our existence. We appear because we must take form. And so, once again, Buddha is not expressed if we do not take form. There is no expression. So we take this form so that we are able to we are able to manifest the essence of Buddha, or just the essence. We don't even, Harada Roshi tells us to go beyond all of these aspects of these namings of things, but we are simply, we must be able to manifest, and to that we appear in some form, but form itself is insubstantial. But we are rolling into philosophy a bit in this, which is interesting. That, I mean, it's a kind of a scholarship of Mr. I keep forgetting his name. Tokusan. Yeah. And in some way, he burns up all of his manuscripts. I mean, here's another thing that we didn't talk about. He sends them off into disappearing. They're disappeared in the fire, in the flames. And what is left then is Tokusan. And Tokusan's appearance and ability then to transcend all of the notions and the ideas that he's been carrying.
That right there just reminds me of what I do with hospice patients. Eventually hospice, as we die, it all hits the fire, and what is left. There was just something about the way you said that. I mean, that Tokusan is enacting a kind of well, I guess we talk about more in terms of surrender as opposed to, a death and coming to enlightenment. But there is a sort of I don't know, does the ego self actually die at the moment of enlightenment?
We could say so, but it's not dead. It is, I keep saying, it's simply no longer problematic.
Because it never was.
Right. It is seen through. And yet, we continue to act in the world, in the relative world, and so the ego reappears, but it is not problematic in its reappearance. That's all. It's just not a problem. That's all I could say then at the moment.
The burning of his manuscript seemed to be a beautiful way to symbolic of his effort or his determination to extinguish his preconceived ideas of reality. He recognizes reality as just illusory.
It's also a beautiful moment in the story. So, but then, then of course, he takes up this very difficult koan. 30 blows if you speak and 30 blows if you don't speak. I mean, what kind of guy? I mean,
break.
Exactly. I mean, that's a tough one. But Harada Roshi leaves us with a tremendous koan. He really does. I mean, supposing, he comes up to you and he says, 30, I'm going to whack you 30 times on the shoulder if you speak and 30 times if you don't. What do you do? How do you attend to that? What would you do?
I think you bow your head and wait for the blows.
That's one way.
Or one could assume our posture in Zazen. No words, just assume the posture.
Well, I love the suggestion that you take the stick away. There's no words. There's just action.
I feel like that's a distillation of how I would frame it. I feel like Sekkei Harada is urging you to strike back.
well, you grab to, you know. You grab the stick.
Well, I think, doesn't he say, and then hit him with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he says to become big people who can snatch Tokusan's Kyosaku stick and beat him with it.
I mean, if that's the answer, then why not respond in kind?
Well, he does say that you can do it. He doesn't say to do it.
Mhm.
So that whatever quality would be in a person who could do that, but not necessarily do it. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, there are a lot of things that you could do that, you know, would stop the show. That's for sure.
Mhm.
And certainly that's one of them, is to grab his stick. But you'd really have to stand. I mean, you can only do that to totally satisfy the koan if you completely understand what you're doing, even though it might be intuitive at that moment. The idea is that in grabbing that stick, we ourselves have awakened, and we stand on that. I mean, that's the point of in answering these koans, that you've answered it. I mean, is grabbing the stick exactly answering that koan?
Well, essentially, if you've answered that koan, if you are awakened, you have grabbed that stick. I think that's how I see it, whether you grab the physical stick or not.
Yeah. So, or you could just allow yourself to be hit 30 times because you're insubstantial. It doesn't mean anything. That's another thing.
Yeah.
What could be more mundane than 30 whacks upside the head?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the head, it's on your shoulder.
Oh.
Muscle. Yeah, it's on
I
your
don't-
shoulder.
I don't know if that meets my criteria of mundane, but I mean, it's subjective, I guess.
Oh, she's getting a kyakusu.
He's getting the stick. There's the Kyosaku. There it is. Woo! Look at how long it is. Can't even fit in the screen. There it is.
Nobody can grab it from you.
That's right. Come grab it. Grab it.
Going.
Oh, here it comes. No, that's not fair.
It's substantial.
I grabbed my walking stick on the way.
Okay. Fueling.
But no matter what you do, there'll be suffering. So whatever you do, you'll be hit. What do? You stand up and act according to the precepts, and sit and take the next step. So somewhere in the middle, just taking the next step, it seems to me, is where that koan is, because there's no way not to be hit, no matter what you do.
So just sit, just do zazen.
It may be, if that's your way.
I'm using that word just, and I shouldn't be using that word just.
Yeah. So to act, to be yourself, to do what's authentic next.
Yeah. That is the word that, to be authentic in that moment is what's called for. And who knows what that is? Who knows what that answer would be?
And you won't
To be authentic.
and it won't avoid the stick, whatever you do.
But the stick is meaningless, actually. It doesn't matter to be, and it doesn't feel like anything anyway. So, I mean, it's just emptiness. So what's the difference, getting hit or not hit?
Yeah.
But to be authentic, an authentic response is what is called for. And Harada Roshi doesn't use that word, but I think that is the word that really brings it forth in that moment. How could we answer Tokusan so that he would agree and say, that's right, that is the problem. So to say that's right, that's the problem. So authenticity, to be authentic in that moment, whatever that may be. And we can't know what that is, I think. We can't know what that would be. Otherwise, it would be planned out, or we'd just be a plan. And that's not it. So
The plan is not the answer.
no, it is not. Can't do something that's planned. It just doesn't work. So yeah.
I think
Not to put too fine a point on the meaning of words, but he requests that we become big people. Grab the stick.
Yeah, big people.
Big people.
Become big people. Yeah. Big people who can snatch Tokusan Kyosaku's stick and beat him with it. And it means to completely meet his awakening and to surpass the teacher. Every student's job is to surpass the teacher. So I think that's what Harada Roshi is meaning in that. That's how I would take that. Beat him with it means to surpass him in terms of awakening. That's what would be called for. That's what would be necessary. Because if that's Tokusan's big teaching, I'm going to whack you. This is his one koan, his one teaching, blah blah blah. How do you take that to another step? How do you beat him at a higher understanding of that particular koan? That's my take on that.
It seems like that pulls together those three components: the great doubt, the great faith, and great determination. Because there you are, you can't choose. No matter what I do, I'm going to get hit. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? How do I, avoidance? How do I avoid that? And then at some point, there's the faith of just moving into that, whatever the moment calls for, as Jerry said, and then the determination to do that. Once you see what needs to be done, to go forward and do it.
Right. No hesitation. Another word for, quality of determination is courage. So those are, sort of together. So the courage to completely act in that authentic response and totally trust it. And trust is another one too, that goes with the determination. So not easy, but kind of fun to think about. So, and then we get to the enlightenment of Gensha. So here we have, once again, we had Gensha in a few chapters way back, and he wants to come back to the story of Gensha, the monk who trained under Zen Master Seppo, who was enlightened through pain. Maybe that Kyosaku sort of brought him to the notion of that. So Gensha had practiced in the monastery, and then he thought, this isn't working. I'm just not getting anywhere. I think I got to quit this. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to sneak out at night. I'm just going to disappear. That does happen, by the way, with monks. They suddenly disappear. And it's very disconcerting to the temple master and to the other practitioners because, there's this camaraderie of care of one another. So when a monk does that, it's very painful for everyone. And yet it happens. And in my own case, I only did it for one afternoon. But everybody at the temple was terrified of what might have happened to me because, after all, I didn't know the area. The place was full of poisonous snakes. And to wander into the mountains at that time of year, you were actually forbidden to go into the mountains because of the poisonous snakes. So anyway, that's what I did. I went up into the rice fields because I just said, I got to get out of this place. I can't stay here. And so I went up and I lay down in a rice field and I sort of fell asleep for about 5 minutes or something. And then I heard the bell ring came up through the canyon, and the bell rang for the 3 o'clock ceremony. I felt so terrible. I just felt terrible. It was so lonely. Anyway, when I finally went back, I went back at 5 o'clock, and all of the monks were looking at me like, where, you know, how, where, blah, blah, blah. They didn't say it, but they were angry with me. And then I went to go to Roshi, the training master, and he said, you know, like, where are you? And I said, Yaman nobody ikimashita. I went mountain climbing. So he just burst out laughing, and that was the end of that. So, but there is that time in which the tension of the monastery becomes so tight, you just want to walk away. And so that was Gensha, you know, walking away in the night, and what happens? Once again, something happens, right? He stubs his toe and rips off his toenail, and what that feels like. Well, at least stubbing your toe. So very, very painful. And then once again, we've got this question: if the body is insubstantial, why do we have pain? He says does not exist, but I'm saying because we use the word insubstantial. If the body is insubstantial, where's the pain? What is that about? Where does the pain come from? So he came to some resolution, and in his practice of Zazen, and he goes back. And from where does this pain come? Was the moment in which his ego self disappeared. Completely forgotten the ego self in that question. And so he realized that he didn't have to go anyplace else. He was able to stay where he was with Seppo. And his concentration on walking with that pain in his toe to come back down the mountain was, you know, an essential learning, an essential awakening for him. He forgot all about the ego. And first there was the pain in the midst of no self. And then there was the consciousness of pain in the midst of no self. Now that's interesting to unpack here, don't you think? First, there was the pain in the midst of no self. Then there was the consciousness of pain in the midst of no self. What's happening there? What is that? There was the condition that brought about the complete resolution to his long-held doubt. What do you suppose is that turn in that sentence? First, the pain in the midst of no self, then the consciousness of pain in the midst of no self. So what we meaning is what Harada Roshi's saying here, because this is Harada Roshi telling the story here, that consciousness, I think for Harada Roshi, is awakening. That's true consciousness. And then consciousness of pain in the midst of no self in a way that it doesn't attach to him.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree to that?
I mean, just looking at it at its most basic, I mean, first there was pain in the midst of no self. Then there was consciousness of pain in the midst of no self. So it's like consciousness is the third variable then in the second sentence, sort of underlying the pain. It's like what is underneath the pain.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
I mean, I think it's like what he's been saying all along. It's, I mean, pain in some sense, in a phenomenological sense, is an idea like materiality.
Right.
And so then there's just the experience of it. And it's almost like it abstracted those two things from each other.
Sure. So, I mean, in a simple way, it no longer attached to him in the same way that an ego pain attaches.
I'm reminded of the phrase, to abandon oneself to conditions as they arise. That may be a lens for looking at these two sentences. The pain is the condition that just arises. It just is. It arises.
Right.
And then the second part, that's the abandoning. That is the complete allowing consciousness to drop into, or the pain to drop into consciousness without grasping.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
The way that I read it was, the pain is immediate and it doesn't take any thought about it. It's just there. And then the next thing was the question, the thought, which was the question, where does this pain come from? And to me, that's the consciousness part, which sets up the condition for the opening. That's the kind of the way I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like another version of the rice cakes in the first story.
Mm-hmm. Similar. Yes. Very similar. So
I know.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Please.
Well, I was just going to say, I always, I try to bring it back to my own experience of pain, and there's like when my back goes out, and then my back will go out and there's the pain, but then there's the story I make up about the pain. And then oh no, now I'm not going to be able to do blank, or now it's going to hurt for days or whatever. And then I certainly don't do this with great regularity, but if I can separate out those two, then I can lower my anxiety. Like the last time my back went out badly, it was like, okay, you've done this before. You know what works. Just slow down. You're really just getting worked up about the story about what happens when this happens, and not really even examining the pain that you're experiencing physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so teasing those things apart has been very useful to me. And so I when I read the paragraph before this, I kind of laughed because it was like, oh, ouch, oh, this has happened. And now, oh, well, where did this come from? And he starts examining his own experience of the physical pain.
Right.
I mean, my sense is that for it to be the turning point, though, he would have to realize that consciousness was always as immediate as the pain.
Sure. We don't see that in the story, but of course, sure.
Because I think, what egos can do. It's like you can create the construct of the distinction. And it's a thought like any other thought. It's like you can think about consciousness in a way that isn't immediate, I think.
And thinking about it would not be it.
Right. And it's so hard to tell the difference.
Yes.
I mean, can you really tell the difference until you don't?
Yeah. Yeah, because we're under the delusion or the impression that we got it. We're thinking, oh, I got this, and we're in thinking it. We think we have it.
Which is exactly why we're doing this in the first place, I think, because that's how our minds work.
Well, we have to do that until we can not do it.
Well, yes.
It's okay. It's okay.
Well, I guess I just made that point for. I mean, it's not wrong.
No, it isn't.
It's our programming. It's how we've been conditioned.
Right. It is our conditioning. Correct. That's right. Yeah. So then Harada Roshi in the next paragraph, on the bottom of the page, I would like each of you to absorb yourself in your practice to such an extent that you forget the self with the same care and caution that Gensha took as he descended the mountain in the dark. Do your practice with your whole body and soul. If you do it this way, the condition that will bring about enlightenment will surely appear. And all he did was to take care of walking. I mean, the pain was essential in this story. The pain in his toe was essential because he needed to walk so carefully so that he didn't, he didn't faint from the level of pain. And so he just concentrated on that so deeply. And then he was able to see through.
Okay.
And then he tells us that this is Zazen in motion. So that's what Gensha was doing as he was walking down the hill in that terrible pain, walking on the rocks and so forth, is Zazen in motion. Great care with each step. And so that is what he is also telling us, that when we get up off the cushion, we continue Zazen in movement. And do that with confidence, whether you're sitting or not. Walk down the mountain and you'll meet the condition necessary for enlightenment. And then Harada Roshi talks about the pole, jump off the pole. This is the Ananda story. Just let go of the pole, Ananda, jump off. So are we willing to surrender? Are we able to surrender the ego self for the aspect of the true self? Are we able to allow the true self to appear and just surrender the ego self? That is to jump off the pole, to let go of the pole. And it doesn't matter whether we've been sitting a long time or whether we are sitting new, we're just beginners. It doesn't make any difference. We can jump off the pole, doesn't matter. I also like this. He says, if you're afraid to take that step, you are afraid or have some sort of attachment, or you are in love with yourself. Didn't you like that, folks? I mean, particularly that's what it is, that we're also in love with our own selves, that we can't be selfless. We just love ourselves so much. We think we don't, but we really kind of do. I mean, we defend ourselves, we defend the ego, we, defend what we like, we care for the, everything and about us. We sort of are in love with ourselves. So
how then would you link that with sort of the following sentiment that, this means that there will be a time when you will realize that each and everything is you?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
But I think it's sort of like that idea, like you can think of consciousness abstracted from like pain, and you could, in a similar way, it's like you can think about everything as you without it really being you.
You can do that.
So I guess I would be interested in like your thoughts on how that might relate to that idea of self-love.
Well, I think what he is meaning is in love with with yourself. That's a small you, it's our ego self that we're in love with. And in the condition in which we realize that each and everything is you is an entirely different situation. This is realization itself. so that we are not separated from anything at all. Whereas in the being in love with yourself, or me being in love with myself, the ego self, is where I will, secure and keep and hold and want and save and protect. I'll do all of those things. But that is not what he is talking about. So once again, we come to a question of opening. Do we open to a world, the totality of the world, in which we are able to realize that each and everything is you? I mean, right now, we're looking at this screen and we're seeing all these people. And right now, as you look, every single one of those persons is inside you.
Well, I think inside is a bit of a stretch because it creates a duality.
Not.
That there's an outside.
It's not, it's, there is no separation of inside and outside. You may be there, but you're also inside me because I cannot see you without you being inside me.
Yeah. Literally.
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, as I understand, people who reach that level of realization, it's like there's no distinction to be made.
Of course.
And is it
either way you frame it?
This whole book.
But either way you frame it, it's dualistic and incomplete. Whether you think of people as outside or inside makes no difference.
Of course it doesn't. There is no inside or outside.
And is it that part of this this big you is that everything I meet outside,
Yeah,
everything I meet is a part of this you. Everything is a part, and that's a part of me too.
correct.
So also things that the little you doesn't like difficult persons I meet during the day, that kind of the little you thinks, oh, that's a difficult person, or that's all part of this big you. Not making differences. So this is what I like and this is what I not like. All I meet is part of this big you. Is that what you mean, Hazel?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And the truth is that even if we are in a state in which we are not liking the person that we might be dealing with, it is still true that everything is a part of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that at that moment, we are not awake. We are not in the awake Dharma position. And so we are not, we're just not awake at that moment. That's all I could say about that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, it is all there. And it only takes a second to shift such that we release ourselves to the realization that we have been clinging to the ego self to define something, to define ourselves in some kind of way that we have become accustomed to. And if we release ourselves to that experience of the realization that we are all of existence, then we're just all of it. That's it. I mean, it's simple.
So there is no separation into persons that we make up.
Right.
We are making up our person. We are making up this person, that person, and in this big you there is not this separation.
Right.
I mean, but it has to be realized. We can talk about it and so forth, and realizing it is another deep matter of practice. So, but in the same way that we talked weeks ago about the question of seeing, not just seeing, but seeing itself, seeing, hearing, tasting. In the realization of seeing, here we go, the word just, there is seeing itself. And in the realization of the no self, there is just the no self with the connection to all, with no absence, no definition of me, and no separation of me from all of other existence. And that's what
so
yep.
Is it that it is not only thinking it, it is feeling it through and through. It is not only thinking it, you know, when I say there is no separation, I can think about separation. But the other thing is, did I realize it through all my body? And I don't know how to say that.
It's very difficult to, we say realize in body and mind, and we don't have the words because there are no words to define it. It cannot be expressed in words at all. And so it becomes a very difficult, problematic thing for us. And yet it is extremely simple, extraordinarily simple. And when Harada talks about sitting Zazen, he is talking about sitting in such a way that you give yourself away. You just give yourself away to the universe. Just give it away. No holding on. Just give yourself away. And when we do that, the whole world just comes flooding in. It just floods right in. And the ego can be seen through, and after that is no longer problematic. Even when it appears, it just is not a problem.
So then you, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Then if you realize that when you are at this point that you realize that, then you can see the little ego mind coming up, and you clearly can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this so?
Yes, that's correct.
In every moment, so you are not trapped. You are not any longer.
You're not trapped. Yeah, that's a good word for it. It is not, this person, this dominant, huge person that we think is has got it or something, or and there is nothing lost. You keep thinking, well, something will be lost. I'll change, and I won't be happy anymore because I won't know my ego self, and what will I do, and my life will change. None of that is true. It's just a thing we make up.
I think this conversation, to me, in some sense, parallels like the section right before this, like the moment at which you're confronted with the kyosaku, and it's like, what do you do? Because I do think it's important to allow for preferences. I mean, at no point, I think, do those disappear.
You can have preferences. I mean, I prefer a cup of coffee to a cup of tea in the morning. Big deal, right? It's a problem.
I guess, but then it's sort of like, what's the difference?
The difference is that I am free to do that.
You're free to do what you want. I mean, which is so ironic.
I am free to have a I am free to have a cup of coffee.
But it's like, but I think that's correct. I mean, as I understand it, it's like you're gaining in the ability to be authentic, or your choice. It's like you get to choose who to be.
Sure.
Which I think is usually not how it's framed, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably not framed like that. But at the same time, it's an extraordinary responsibility at the same time, because, the koan of how do you live and what do you do and how do you proceed from that point does not go away. You are still caught and stuck with this being in the world and what should be done and what do you do. I mean, that koan remains because of the huge responsibility of what that realization is. But why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
I mean,
just surrender.
It's like all roads lead to Rome, you know? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Okay. Roshi says, please persist in your practice. There will be a time when you will realize that each and everything is you. Please persist in your practice. And he says that every time. Sit well, focus well, practice, continue, persist. Persistence. All that's the key. Oh. And my friends, there is an issue of time.
There's what?
An issue of time. Even though greatly timeless, all great things come to an end. Everything is temporary. So.
But we are determined.
Yep. But very good work. This is wonderful. Next time we come to the last chapters in this book. And so we'll finish up this book next week when we come together. And maybe we'll come together. Maybe we'll have a week after that in which we reflect and look back upon the whole book. Just because it's there's so many profound teachings in it. My goodness, almost the whole book is underlined for me. It's just a fantastic book. Just very, very, very wonderful. And
maybe we could each bring our favorite section.
That would be excellent.
Like
we'll
that.
do that in the second week, but we'll just do the next week. We'll just take this, and then the week after that, maybe everybody gets to talk a little bit about their section and what it means, how it affected them, and that's a good idea, Karen. We can certainly do that. So there it is. So please practice, and just continue. So we are talking about having Zazen out of doors in the summertime. With the coronavirus and the way it is acting right now, it's increasing in our county. It's increasing just everywhere up along the coast and in the south. And so we're hesitating to come indoors together out of safety and common sense, actually. So we have a lovely garden to sit Zazen in, and so that is what we will likely figure out how to do, and we'll maybe put out a schedule for people to come, and we're already sitting outside, so we just keep following the outside practice. And but we have to wait until after July 5th when summer comes in the Pacific Northwest. It waits until July 5th, I think it is, and then we can sit outside, and we'll figure that out in the mornings. I think it's a beautiful place to sit, so we'll do that. And I can't think. Was there anything else about board members who were here that came up last night that we wanted to tell everybody about?
We were going to have that sashimi to work in the
Oh,
on the grounds.
That's right. I'll put that in the newsletter tomorrow. And that is going to be on July 11th on a Saturday. And we will have a sesshin. So we will sit zazen and we'll work, and we'll sit zazen and work. And it will be bring your own lunch. And it'll probably be something like from 9 to 3 in the afternoon, something like that. And I'll put out a schedule in the newsletter so that those who are not practitioners but are neighbors might like to come and work with us in the garden. And or you'll know what the schedule is if you can't come for the whole day. Maybe you can come for part of it. So that's what we will do on that Saturday. And so yes, I'll put that in the newsletter tomorrow. So thank you. Yeah. Well, good to see everybody. Good to see everybody. Yuta, have a good day while we go to sleep here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's so fantastic to get up so early. That is so great.
Well, I'm grateful to join you. That's really, thank you.
Yeah, really, really good. So, all right, everybody. Allison, I spoke about your mother earlier. She's home from the hospital now, yes?
No, staying another night.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, she's doing okay. She just needs to get more strength, and she'll be home tomorrow.
Okay, all right. And I learned that Michael will be going into Mother Joseph Care Center. I don't know when, but he won't be going to that place that he feared that they might send him, that rehab place that was so chaotic and difficult for him.
Okay,
so,
good.
Anyway, so he will, he'll go to Mother Joseph.
Okay.
So, all right, everybody. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, wait a second. We chant out. Sorry. Beings are numberless. Save them. Illusions are inexhaustible. Karma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed. I vow to become it. Thank you very much, everyone. Please take care out there. Wear your masks, wash your hands.